Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Tyrone back with Tech Life. And I wanted to bring you guys back to this chart as we discuss recent commentary from Mike Katz and Peter Osvaldik at the Morgan Stanley Conference. I got my coffee here, so you guys know what that means by now. This is going to be a longer video. And let's get right into it. So I wanted to bring this up because of the commentary that was made, I believe specifically by Mike Katz. What his commentary alluded to is them already pretty much saying like, hey, look, perception wise on our network today, we are on par with AT&T, but we really have our eyes set on Verizon. We're looking past AT&T. We don't really want to discuss them much. We have our eyes specifically set on the network leader, the perceived network leader by perception, and that is Verizon. So I want to add to that briefly. So anything that T-Mobile structures, models, they model that around Verizon. Any of their guidance, their networking aspirations and ambitions, they model that around Verizon. Verizon is their benchmark competitor. When they speak on their success in business gains and churn, they compare that to Verizon. It's their benchmark competitor. So that means they're clearly looking past AT&T. They feel they have already surpassed them in network performance, in all of their benchmarking, what they're trying to achieve and accomplish. They're looking past AT&T. And like I just said, they have their eyes clearly set on Verizon. So what's it going to take? The next question is, what's it going to take for them to get to the level of Verizon when it comes to networking perception, right? With perception, you can do a lot with perception. And you can, in some cases, you can get the perception of having a similar network even though you don't, right? Perception is a very tricky thing. And in this case, in some ways, T-Mobile is trying to achieve a perception when the network is really still not there. Let's be honest, right? The network is still smaller. I will acknowledge that any day of the week and twice on Sundays. And today is Sunday, so yes, it is still a smaller network. But each and every year that goes by, they close and cut into that gap, and they cut that gap by half already, as we're talking to about perception. They cut it by half. So now the next step is you have to deploy. In some ways, right, perception will help you, but you really have to, you really just have to embrace the grind and deploy the network at scale. You have to do that. That has to be a piece to the puzzle. You can't have this messaging. You can't have, oh, we have the nation's largest 5G network, and then you still don't have coverage in X, Y, and Z. That's not going to work for long-term purposes. But as each year goes by, with the customer focus driven analysis, T-Mobile will get there. They will eventually close the gap enough. And like I said in the previous video, the headache and the problem of T-Mobile is not going away for Verizon. I said that in the Verizon video yesterday. T-Mobile is continuing to stick around. They continue to grow and they continue to scale the network each and every year. So let's look at this chart briefly. So 85,000 ending macro sites. That's a lot of sites. No matter how you look at it, if a good chunk of that is for the metro core, it's still a lot of sites. So we have to acknowledge that. It's a lot of towers that T-Mobile has on air at the ending macro site count. Thousands of new coverage sites. That's an important piece to what's being discussed in terms of network perception, right? When T-Mobile does their national advertising, it gets people engaged. It gets them excited. Hey, there's another player perhaps. And then people start looking up T-Mobile in Google search. They don't see any stores. So then they automatically perceive, oh, T-Mobile doesn't operate in our town. While that might be the case, it might also not be the case. T-Mobile is expanding the network fairly quickly. They just have to, get branding and distribution out there in some cases to get the rights to win, or whatever they're calling it internally now. And then that changes, right? So each and every quarter, more stores are opening, more sites are being turned on, and that helps T-Mobile in the biggest way possible. So thousands of new coverage sites, they will have to continue building those even long after the original planning period for the merger. And those are still the sites that they're building through the planning period. They still have to add more coverage sites in Nebraska. They're gonna work through that this year. They're gonna have to add more in Vermont. They're gonna have to add more in Maine. They're gonna have to add more in the South and North Dakotas, the Montanas, the western side of the country, the Nevadas. They're gonna have to add more sites. And then people are still commenting and discussing the whole satellite thing again. The satellite thing, that has to be a situation where you really don't have access to a native network. If you're traveling down the interstate, you should not be connecting to a satellite. That's not going to work. There's too much data being used today in today's network. The satellite's going to crash. The satellite can't handle streaming 4K content. It can't. It might not even be able to handle several music streams. It might be able to do a little bit of texting here and there, calling, some messaging, some emailing. Especially for iMessages, you need a little bit of data throughput, and I think it can handle that. But beyond that, it's going to be such a devastating experience that you can't. Wherever there's population, wherever there's traffic, you can't use the satellite. It's just not going to work, and I think T-Mobile understands that. At least I hope they do. You can use that in specific scenarios. If you're literally out in the middle of nowhere, where Verizon and AT&T do not have any native networking, that's when you use satellite. Wherever AT&T and Verizon have native networks, you need to also add native networks. You can't replace a native tower network with satellite. It's not going to work permanently. You can't sell you can't sell any postpaid services off of satellite networks. It's not going to work like that. You have to use it in very specific cases, like if you're traveling in a mountainous area where services are hard to get to. That's when the satellite kicks in. If you're going deep sea fishing out in the boonies, that's where the satellite services can kick in. If maybe you're on a small highway, very small highway, 2-lane highways going down the road in the middle of Timbuktu, and for those purposes, while you're traveling, 80 miles, 75, 60 miles an hour, whatever, and T-Mobile has yet to launch a site there, they're having permitting issues, whatever, that might be able to scenario where you can fill that in with the satellite coverage. And, if it works, right? But you can't have that as a permanent solution. It's not going to work. It's going to overload the satellites. There's not enough spectrum. It's just not going to work. It's going to make it a piss poor experience across the board. So you have to, even after the planning period of the merger sites, you have to continue to deploy thousands of coverage sites over the next several years. And then the small cell piece, that's a very important piece as we continue to discuss the 9 to 10 billion Capex. Is it enough? Can T-Mobile make this work? And there isn't a public breakdown. The more I think about it, the more it's being discussed. The 17 to 17.5 billion from Verizon, and the reason we look at Verizon is because that's T-Mobile's benchmark competitor. That's not all going to the wireless infrastructure, so let's make that clear. Verizon has national, global businesses that they operate that comes out of that capital allocation. They have private networking across the ports in Europe that they invest in. They have Fios that they still continuously invest in, although the one fiber build is ramping down, so they're not heavily invested in that. The LTE side of things, They're not heavily invested in that anymore. And some other stuff might be, getting they're leaning out the company, but they are still having to invest in large businesses on the enterprise side, like FiOS, building, I don't know, fiber for this company, and then having to continue to truck roll to the C-band sites. So that's all part of the capital allocation. But if I had to take a guess, and I'm just speculating here, I'm taking a guess, straight wireless, C-band new sites, C-RAN, millimeter wave C-RAN, still having to hook up, some sites to the one fiber network, which is still going to continue. It's not going to be at the same scale, but they will still have to hook up and trench fiber for some sites within that footprint. I would say probably, if I had to take a guess, 12 to 13 billion of the 17 and a half is going towards straight wireless infrastructure. So, still outspending T-Mobile, right? 2 to 3 billion, but and that's even if that number is right, because I'm speculating here, but it's not really being seen in the results. T-Mobile is kicking butt and taking names here. 17.5 billion market share in rural, going to 20% by the end of 2025. Like I said, 13 more percent they have fair share, which has never even been a thought that occurred to T-Mobile, that they could even achieve that. Now that's a very achievable goal. They're taking share in enterprise, and we will hear more on that soon. Trust me on that. They're taking share on that. They're trying to go after government agencies. They're going bigger on that. There's possibly some fiber deals going on that they're going to indulge in because they have some free cash flow. So they're making it work. The 9 to 10 billion is doing a lot for the business because it's feeding their growth and their guidance. If they weren't hitting their guidance, if they weren't able to get to the 20%, if they weren't able to get to the 7 to 8 million FWA customers, then that would, to me, signal an alarm like, hey, you need to invest more to get to those numbers. But if they can invest the 9 to 10 billion consistently and hit all of their guidance, they continue to be 100% buy rating from analysts across the already what many consider overvalued stock, then the 9 to 10 billion it is. Why are you going to invest more when you are as successful as you are today? That's the big question. And let me get this out the way too before some ask. Yes, T-Mobile's Capex is coming in a bit lighter this year. It's at 8.6 to 9.4. So they did dip a little below the 9. I still anticipate them to come in at the 9.4. So, there's that. I still fully anticipate that. And the reason that they were able to cut back a little is because Auction 108, they made that very clear at the conference. They're able to fill in more bandwidth across 300,000 square miles of the United States with a software upgrade. Those sites have already been upgraded and touched with the Capex that they spent in 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. Remember, they spent more in the 21s, the 22s, and the 23s. Their Capex was closer to 13 billion. They spent 10, 11, and I think 12, 13. I think at the end of 23, I'd have to check it, but they came closer to 14. I think they came in at like 13.8. So you got to remember, that's a lot of Capex for T-Mobile. That's the most that they've ever spent. So they were able to pull in Capex to accelerate because they knew Auction 108 was going to get cleared. So they wanted to have that already deployed. So they were pre-planning. They were building ahead of time. That's what they were doing. They were building ahead of time by accelerating Capex and spending more in the 2021, 2022, 2023. They did this smartly. And now today we're seeing counties go from 80 to 180, 50 to 180. Some are going to 190. And that's an instant success for T-Mobile without having to touch those sites again. So now Just like Verizon is saying some of their programs are coming down, right, in terms of investing, T-Mobile can say the same. They could literally say, hey, look, we don't have to truck roll to that many sites anymore. We have 2.5 deployed at scale. We can add bandwidth to 300,000 square miles of our network without having to touch those sites. We do not have to truck roll. We can do this with the software upgrade. So that 8.6 to 9.4, I mean, they can use that for who knows what, C-RAN, expansion, C-band and DoD, wherever they choose to deploy that more aggressively. So T-Mobile just became a lot more flexible by investing more in the years prior. We haven't discussed that much. I think that's people emphasize the 9 to 10, and then they talk about 9 to 10, 9 to 10. But what about the years they spent more? What about the years where they went to 11 to 12 billion, 10 to 11, 12 to 13? And if my memory suits me correctly, I think they spent closer to 14 in 2023. I have to check that again. But so that's just to make you guys aware. They're trying to make this big puzzle, and they're fitting in the pieces to the puzzle. They have the assets now. That's not an excuse anymore for T-Mobile. They have low band, contiguous low band. They have all the mid band. They have millimeter wave. They got the assets now. Now it's just go and deploy and execute. And that's exactly what T-Mobile is doing to the T. And I think a lot of people are really underestimating, and they're going to be surprised how quickly and how big this develops for T-Mobile over the next several years. So I'll leave you guys with that just to close out. Just wanted to bring that up again because there's still concern about the 9 to 10 billion. So I wanted to discuss that. So the small cell plan is clearly in effect. For those of you who stuck around to the end of the video, 27,000 legacy small cells in the network today, 50,000 ending small cells. The math is there. They're going to deploy another 23,000 small cells across the nation, C-RAN likely, N41. And who knows, in the future, they might even deploy another 20,000. So that remains to be seen. We still need an updated guidance for sure. So make sure you guys stay tuned to the channel. Like, share, subscribe if you're new. Follow my social media outlets. This is Tyrone with Tech Life. See y'all in the next one. Peace.